All right, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Empire. You have Rene and Marek, the two co-founders of Celo, joining us. Really excited to have this episode. Marek and Rene, welcome to the show, guys.
It's great to be here.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really great to be here.
Yeah, I think the first place I'm going to start, I've been following Celo since like the very early days and have never had you two on the show. And I think you two have been a little quieter in the like what I'd call the crypto native, crypto Twitter sphere, but maybe bigger in some of the real world ecosystems, maybe outside of the Twitter sphere. So maybe I'll pick on Rene to just give like a quick overview on the last couple of years in Celo at like a very high level for maybe crypto Twitter sphere people who are listening who maybe don't know Celo, and then we can get into some of the fun stuff you guys are working on if that works for you.
Sounds great. Yeah. I mean, this is a good prompt to just even like go back in time to when we first started thinking about, Celo. And we recently looked back at the old white paper and we're actually like, wow, this exists now, this has been built, and some of the stuff the core team built, some of the stuff people in the community built. But it's interesting because what really got us into the space was, I think, a realization that Ethereum smart contracts, just generally Web3, would potentially bring a huge change in how people are able to access the digital economy. And I think for us, it was exciting to play a role in that. And the first thing we did is build a wallet on Ethereum and put it in front of real people, people that weren't like deep in the space, and try to get an understanding of what would be required to make this stuff work for everyday people. And this is going back 5, almost 6 years ago at this point, and there was a big gap. And I think the gap to some extent still exists, right? But it's also it's been closing, and I think Celo has played a pretty big role in helping close the gap. And you now have people really all over the world that are using products built on Celo, often not realizing that it's powered by an open, permissionless public blockchain under the hood, but bringing them real value in their day-to-day lives. And so in many ways, this was and has been our focus of all these years. And as much as I think, personally speaking, I have Marek chime in, I'd love to chime in on a lot of the Twitter arguments that are happening. There's 24 hours in a day, and we like to spend those time with product with founders in the ecosystem and moving the puck forward. And I do think that has led to Celo being a little less known than some of its peers, but I think that's also really changing this year as there's the shift and focus on, hey, how is this stuff actually work, and like how is this used in the wild? Does Web3, it's kind of the moment, right? Does Web3 have like a reason to exist? And I think this has led to a lot of people starting to look at Celo now and maybe sometimes taking a second look and saying, oh, wait a second, like, wow, you guys are actually delivering against not just Celo's initial promise, but I think why a lot of people got into the space.
I actually want to go pre-Celo for a second. I was doing a little LinkedIn stalking and saw that you were both at MIT, and then it looks like co-founded a company together, got bought by GoDaddy, and then spent, looks like maybe 3 or 4 years at GoDaddy. Did Celo come out of some of the problems that you guys saw inside of GoDaddy with like how that world worked, or two totally unrelated things?
Yeah, maybe I can take that. I would say it's unrelated, but you're right. Rene and I met at MIT. Actually, we met, a funny story, we met in a class taught by Tim Berners-Lee about the original Web3. So back then, 2010 timeframe, Tim Berners-Lee was working on the semantic web and linked data, and for a while people were calling that the third version of the web. And so actually our first company, Loku, it was primarily a machine learning company in the data space, and it had those origins in Web3, which is pretty funny.
Wait, what was web? What was the third web? I don't know that story.
So there's this effort to create open databases using what's called the semantic web or linked data. It's the idea that you have documents that represent data that are linking to each other, much the way that documents on the web link to each other. And so this is the idea behind the semantic web, and the W3, the Web3 W3C Foundation and Tim Berners-Lee have been working on standardizing this now for a while. And for a while, people were calling that the third version of the web. So this idea that we could do to data what Tim Berners-Lee did for documents, namely make them open, make them accessible to everyone. Fast forward to today, it turns out that having open data is really valuable, and the semantic web was one way to achieve that. But another way to do that is permissionless public ledgers, and clearly, I think there's been just a wealth of activity around this way of representing data in a fully open and transparent manner.
Yeah,
I would maybe just to add super quickly to this. I think there's some parallels here, right? And in many ways, for me, what kind of drew me to sort of the original Web3 or the semantic web are some of the things that I think drew us into Web3 now, right? Which is sort of really giving power to the individual, to sort of a community of people versus centralizing power. And this is back in 2009, 2010, right? Even then, people were talking about, hey, what is happening with sort of big sort of Web 2 kind of conglomerates, like the power they're amassing over their users, right? And so in many ways, some of the discussions back then were a precursor of what I think people are discussing now as they look at what Web3 architecture can enable.
I want to tie this into the kind of L1 wars, I guess I'd call them, and that happened in 2020 and 2021. And maybe I'd just zoom out and talk about like the L1 ecosystems in general. So when you guys launched Celo, my memory is you launched sometime mid 2017, if I remember that correctly, or late 2017. So sometime in 2017, you can correct me if I'm wrong there. But what happened is you had all these kind of other L1s that like took advantage of, I'd call it like the ICO boom. A lot of those didn't actually work out, but you did have these other L1s like the Solanas and the Avalanches and kind of the Nears and Phantoms that did really well in the kind of 2020 days. And some of those are still doing well and others aren't. I'd be curious to hear, now I think all the talk of the town are these like are L2s like Optimism and Arbitrum, or have kind of taken the narrative. I'd be curious to get your take on like where you all sit in the ecosystem and like what is the value prop of Celo relative to all these other things that are getting built right now.
Yeah, maybe I start high level, and Marek, feel free to jump in on some of the, I think this is also maybe a good opportunity to start talking a little bit about the Celo roadmap and Celo 2.0, which we recently announced. But I think at a high level, we were from the beginning very driven by what does it take to achieve a certain use case, right? And for us, that started really from the end user experience and then going all the way down the stack to recognize certain areas where at the time Ethereum was falling short. And I think even today, you will be hard pressed to find an infrastructure that can accommodate a micropayments use case and easy cash in, cash out, right? Without the need for multiple tokens in a local community somewhere. And for us, I think really zooming in on that use case at the center of what has become a much richer ecosystem and set of use cases, I think has really led to a differentiation. So I think a lot of the stuff that you see on Celo, that you see working and growing, is very different than the things that have worked on some of these other chains you mentioned, where there's, I think, a lot more similarities in terms of how people are engaging with those and what some of the use cases are, which oftentimes are much more driven by, whale DeFi activity, for example, right, versus peer-to-peer payments in a local market, or people kind of creating sort of these sort of really native new kind of digital economies. So to me, that in some ways has kept us out of those layer one wars, because we've been just focused on those use cases. But I think increasingly we get pulled into that because people are saying, hey, wait a second, I can build all the things on Celo that I can build on a Polygon, on an Avalanche, right? And so why should I not pick Celo? And the answer is actually there are good reasons to pick Celo. And in fact, we are increasingly, as we're also seeing more and more projects launch and kind of transaction volume increase and projects becoming more successful, right, I think that has led us to think about, okay, from a roadmap perspective, what are the things that are actually necessary to help those projects grow with and on Celo? And so rather than starting from like this, hey, let's build kind of a thing that no one will really know how to use, but that may be useful 10 years from now and will sound really sexy. Let's just build something pragmatically that works, that achieves a lot of the things that we're looking to achieve, and is future-proof in a way that it can be extended over time. And the way Celo is set up is that through on-chain governance, Celo holders can vote on changes to the protocol. There have been several hard forks. There have been tons of proposals, right, to bring changes to Celo. So even since mainnet launch, which, by the way, was in 2020, so we're coming up on our 3-year mainnet anniversary on Earth Day this year. There's been a lot of change to the core protocol. But yeah, I'll let Marek chime in on some of more of the specifics. But that's kind of how I would think about high level.
Yeah, and I think first and foremost, we were big believers of the Ethereum ecosystem. We started our journey in the Ethereum ecosystem by first building a wallet on Ethereum. And actually the reason we ended up working on Celo, the platform itself, is because as Rene mentioned, we wanted to have some functionality that made it really easy for non-crypto native people to use wallets and kind of address their real world use case needs. And so that took us down the path of thinking, okay, well, we need a consensus protocol that is secure and decentralized, but also that offers one block finality, so that when you send the payment to someone, you don't have to worry about that payment being rolled back. And when you make that decision, you end up creating a proof of stake protocol that is, in our case, it was new and novel when we launched almost 3 years ago. I think Celo was the first proof of stake, like major proof of stake EVM compatible chain, which was really exciting. And then we also added other features like the ability to pay for gas with tokens natively in the platform, without third-party bundlers or meta transaction relayers, which ended up being really nice. So that if I send you a stable coin, you can send that on to someone else without being stuck, which I'm sure many of your listeners may have personally even experienced. And then we added phone numbers as an identity layer. It's an optional identity layer. It's something that wallets can opt into, and it allows folks to send payments to phone numbers and to people in your contact list in a fully decentralized way. And that, I think, is probably one of the biggest enablers for kind of P2P payments on Celo. And we wanted it to be core and a first-class citizen in the platform, so that it worked across different wallets, so that it was truly a standard. And so those were some of the decisions that took us down the path of working on a new layer one. I think critically, I think we saw just how far ahead the EVM was compared to every other kind of idea at the time, and we're glad that we made the right bet. I think we've been really close to the Ethereum ecosystem, and as Rene mentioned, we have some pretty exciting plans up ahead with kind of Celo 2.0 that bring us even closer. One of which will be the ability to pay for gas with WETH soon on Celo, which will be, I think, really, really nice.
Nice. You talked about phone numbers. Like when I think about Celo, as a maybe kind of outsider looking in, one of the first things that comes to mind is mobile first. And you guys have this light client that uses ZK Snarks, I think it is, to help users sync with the network with only a few kilobytes of data. And then you also have these, like you mentioned, Marek, you've kind of securely mapped phone numbers to wallet addresses, which is a really clear, gives people the ability to send crypto to obviously friends and family in your contact list before you even sign up for a wallet, which is a really nice feature. What is the like what's been the impact of building this like mobile first layer here?
Yeah.
Yeah, look, I jump in a little bit, and maybe just even give some stats. You know, I saw this recently. One of the AMMs built on Celo posted sort of the distribution of their usage, and there was, I think, over 80% of people that were accessing it were doing so from mobile devices, right? And then likely signing transactions with mobile wallets like Valora. And that's a fundamentally different user behavior, right, than your typical user, kind of connecting on a desktop with MetaMask, right, or some other setup. And so that's really, I think, where, to your original question, hey, why in this world of all these layer ones and layer twos now, why should people care about Celo? And it is a fundamentally different audience that you're able to reach when you're building a dApp. You have really a lot of the mobile tooling. You have SDKs, right, to quickly build mobile dApps. You have best-in-class mobile wallets. You have the ability to really streamline the user experience by paying, by allowing people to pay, for example, in stable coins or soon with. And you have on and off ramps, right? In a lot of markets where really regular people want to easily cash in from their mobile money account, right? And they don't want to jump through like 4 or 5 hoops or go through an exchange, right? But they just want to like fund their wallet and then use a dApp and go on with their life, right? Or cash out from a payment they got for doing some work in an online marketplace. So I think that by focusing so specifically on mobile and making sure that people that are building on Celo can have a really tight, great experience on mobile, I think that's led to a fundamentally different user base. And in a way, is also, I think, the reason you have a lot of dApps, that have chosen to deploy on Celo. They start in Ethereum or another VM, but they're looking to grow their audience, and Celo is a really great way to do that.
Yeah, and when we started, nobody was talking about mobile, right? Like, I think everything was desktop based. Everything was basically through, MetaMask as a browser extension. I don't think there were any real major mobile wallets out at the time. Certainly, there was no Solana phone being talked about. And I was going around talking about how, we have this backwards, Web3 should be leading Web2 moved to mobile like 10 years ago already, right? There's this famous book called just Mobile First. That's just an amazing read. And I think it's by Luke Wróbelski, if I remember correctly. And, Web2, that book took Web2 by storm, and Web2 transitioned, but somehow Web3 was, behind in this like really, really important way. And so part of the focus around mobile was, to get that evolution right. But, part of it was also this belief that for the advantages that crypto and Web3 offer, the people who need those advantages the most are mobile devices. And so we should be building mobile. And that's what took us down the path of like coming up with a consensus protocol that used threshold cryptography and BLS 12-377, which then enabled us to actually create snark-based like clients, which no other protocol has. Certainly no other EVM compatible protocol has. And that's amazing, right? Like, clients are critically important for security and decentralization, and we worked really, really hard to create something that allows you to sync with very, very little data.
Yeah. What's been the one of the main reasons I want to have you guys on Empire is I think we're at the like heart of this bear market, and I think there are a lot of people maybe who aren't deeply embedded in crypto land saying like, what are we all doing this for? Like, what are the use cases here? Can you guys talk about the actual real world use cases here and like what you've seen as the impact of some of these technical decisions that you've made?
Totally. Yeah, I would say today, a lot of what has been in sort of broader Web3, right, what's actually working is in gaming, right? And then you mentioned DeFi as an example, but we've really not seen sort of a lot of real world use cases, right? And so I think this is why it's interesting to take sort of a bit more of a deep dive into the Celo ecosystem and look at projects that are solving real world problems, and sometimes connecting, really just using sort of the kind of the Celo chain as sort of a settlement layer, right, for what they're building, but sometimes also smartly connecting those applications into the broader ecosystem, digital economy, whether that's for liquidity, right, and connecting global capital markets to small-scale farmers in Mexico, which is something that, for example, Ethic Hub is doing with coffee farmers, allowing folks to basically, do loans, right, peer-to-peer loans to small-scale farmers, which otherwise would have no access to those loans and capital generally, right? But there's an element here, of course, leveraging kind of a broader DeFi movement, but then tying it to kind of a real-world use case. I think the other area, and this is something that Celo has really, in a way, been getting known as the home for refi, regenerative finance. And maybe for those who are not familiar with the term regenerative finance, the way I would define it is really, kind of derived from regenerative economics and decentralized finance, but sort of having a financial system that has positive externalities. So imagine you're participating in a financial system, but by doing so, you're not actually extracting more from the environment or from people, but you're actually having a positive impact. So, by transacting more, that has a positive impact on the environment or on the community. And some examples for that, which are live on Celo and have been growing quite nicely, it's things like, for example, having currencies backed by natural assets. And by doing so, right, the more those currencies, local currencies, often community currencies, the more they're used, the more they lead to a preservation of those natural assets. And an example of that would be a project called Collectivo, which has developed a whole framework for that and has started rolling that out in a bunch of different places, starting in Curacao, where you have a community currency, the Curacao Guilder, that's on-chain and backed by natural assets, starting with food forests, local food forests, coral reefs in the future, and other assets that, as you imagine that economy growing and more of that currency circulating and being used, more of those assets being preserved. So that's quite powerful. But you also see it by really by starting to bring kind of connectivity in a sense beyond information, but with value, right, to communities. You start seeing people in really all over the world suddenly be connected to this digital economy, right? You have artists, creators that can create things and access a global audience. You start seeing people that one of my more recently kind of projects I've been spending some time with is plastics, where people are pretty familiar now with the concept of carbon offsets, right? And it's widely discussed. And in fact, the big challenge with carbon offsets is greenwashing, right? And Web3 actually helps because it brings more liquidity to those markets and it brings more transparency. And so you actually, over time, you'll see a flight to high quality assets, right? Because a corporate who wants to offset their carbon footprint, right, and purchase those credits and doing so on chain will bring transparency, right, to the market, to those projects that will straight on address that kind of issue, right? And there's other benefits too, but what's much less known is that this is really just the tip of the iceberg when you think about climate assets and taking positive climate action. So you now have a team called Plastics that has created sort of a similar concept for offsetting the plastics footprint of an organization or a community, and basically providing a mechanism for people in a local community to, collect, for example, plastics, bring them to recycling centers and get monetary value in the form of a token directly for that can be used again in this digital economy, right? And all of these things are building blocks in this broader regenerative, digital economy that people can now build with. My hope is that this year people also will start more engaging with that and seeing a totally different side of Web3 and crypto.
Marek, before you jump in, I'm curious, Rene, where or Marek, you can take the answer to this, but where is this activity actually happening? I'm assuming it's outside of the United States.
Yeah, great question. For a lot of the P2P payments activities, certainly we're seeing a lot of that happening outside the US, a lot in LATAM, a lot in Africa. I think Rene mentioned Collectivo. They're based in Curacao. There's other protocols that are giving out UBIs, universal basic incomes on Celo, like Impact Market and Good Dollar. And these are also operating primarily in emerging markets. I think Impact Market is focused heavily on favela communities in Brazil, communities throughout West Africa, and even places like Afghanistan after the US withdrawal. So real adversarial environments where it's very difficult to get any sort of payment to someone in a cost-effective way. And they found that with Celo, with the ability to send value really cheaply to anyone using the same rails in every country that they operate, they're I think about an order of magnitude more efficient than something like Give Directly, which outside of Web3 has been kind of the leader for doing really, really low overhead and efficient cash transfers. But what's really great about Impact Market is, they disperse those funds to these beneficiaries. They've dispersed, millions and millions of dollars now. And then the money circulates in these communities. People use mobile wallets like Valora, which I spend some of my time on, which is kind of the evolution of that wallet that we started on Ethereum. They use it like people in the US use Venmo, and the money just circulates in these communities. Again, you can pay for gas with tokens on Celo, so you can send stable coins and you can send it to people in your contact list, and it just circulates. There's another project that's been planting trees in Kenya called Sylvie. They're incentivizing. It's a whole protocol incentivizing the planting of trees around this one rainforest that's being deforested over there. And they have an interesting protocol which incentivizes the planting of the trees. But what's really cool to see is once the trees are planted and once people verify that other people have done the work, naturally you need some game theoretic elements to make sure that people are doing this well. But the end result is this money lives in these communities, in these farmer communities, and starts to circulate in these farmer communities, which is just incredible.
I feel like you're making that. Go ahead, Rene.
No, I think there's I think a lot of the examples we've given and described are really oftentimes grassroots projects, right, that are starting in a community and that grow from that community, then grow to other communities, right? So it's a different timeline, right, than sort of you have your big kind of NFT drop and it gets a bunch of people like to pay attention for a moment, right? But this is really sustainable engagement, right, that grows over time. And I think to me, and I guess when we started this, like, we had a very long time horizon sort of that we kind of felt we would be working against, just given some of the technical challenges. A lot of the stuff actually, happened faster, but I'm very bullish that the first chain to really, or ecosystem to really onboard and truly onboard, not just like a one-off, but really sustainably onboard 1 billion people to Web3 is Celo. And that's like, probably truer now than it ever was, just given a lot of, the amazing projects that are happening at a grassroots level. And then I think also supercharged with things like Deutsche Telekom, right, which has 250 million people in their, global user base, right, that are also, taking a deep look at Web3 now. They're already validating on Celo, they're running oracles, right, and they're they're actually like, they have an exceptional team. Now that I'm in Europe, I'm spending a lot more time with their team, and I'm just impressed by sort of the expertise that they have in-house around Web3, right? Which is 5-6 years ago, sort of, for corporate, you would not have expected that. And so all that makes me really bullish that we're, over the next few years, we're going to get really close to actually, bringing real people in big numbers into this digital economy and giving them real world value every day. So that continues to be sort of the North Star and why we're here. But it's really encouraging to see the diversity also in approaches and projects that are contributing towards making that happen.
Do you guys think that is the Valora kind of the holy grail here in terms of like the kind of the first, like, do you think that'll be the first real world use case that gets to, I don't know, whatever big number that we want to call it, 10 million users, 100 million users, billion users? Is it Valora, or are there other things on the horizon?
Yeah, certainly lots of things on the horizon. But Valora, I'm biased. I work there as well. Very, very excited about it. I think it does a really good job of showcasing all of the really amazing features that Celo has to offer, and just creates just a really, really easy to use mobile wallet. And if you look at the homepage or the home screen for the wallet, yes, there's a whole dApp browser. You can sign transactions within dApps, and that's quite elegant. But the two kind of primary actions on the home screen are send and receive, and so it's really, I would say, kind of catered towards this kind of payments use case. And again, that's what we're seeing in emerging markets, people using the wallet for. So yeah, I'm very, very excited. If you haven't tried Valora, I highly recommend checking it out. Yeah, I don't know, Rene, are there any other exciting things coming down that we can talk about?
Look, to me, I see Valora and also some of the other wallets as like key fabric, right? And I think if the better Valora, the better the experience as you use a lot of the other products. Halo 5 used to be called Good Ghosting, just rebranded, and like as is super popular right now. It's kind of kind of non-loss lottery kind of group savings. And I think, obviously some of the use cases we talked about, I think to me, I actually, maybe this is where Marek and I I don't think it's a disagreement, but I actually think it's going to be a collection of different applications, right? In different places, really kind of growing all, finding product market fit, or some of them have found product market fit, and they're growing week over week, months over month, and so it's not like this one big moment where suddenly it's like, wow, this thing, but it's a lot more sustainable in that sense. Now you do have obviously some bigger organizations, part of the ecosystem. I mentioned Deutsche Telekom, T-Mobile, Kickstarter, and now they're decentralizing, doing that with Celo. So there is definitely, when you have sort of, someone who brings a big existing audience and is able to successfully actually onboard them, and often that requires to actually abstracting a lot of Web3 into the background, right, and just giving people a great user experience. Then I think that those can be all big drivers. But to me, the power of Celo really comes down to a lot of these building blocks just working really well together. And this is something that I also personally really, I enjoy working in this ecosystem where people are just very collaborative, where people are very aligned towards what's the North Star. And so you do see a lot of collaborations, partnerships, projects teaming up and, doing interesting things together. So to me, yeah, I think it's probably the combination of a few things that just are on sort of their path and are sort of growing. But yeah, certainly helps to have really strong wallets with, we talked a little bit about the Fiat Connect standard and, the Connect the World program of just making on and offboarding just super seamless, which I think that's really what's been holding back Web3 adoption more broadly. It's just too painful today. And we discovered that pretty early just by trying this out and like realizing the pain ourselves. And so that's been a big focus for the foundation, but also for Valora and for a lot of the kind of key ecosystem projects that are working on this. And it's truly a joint effort of the ecosystem. And when we crack that, I think it will dramatically accelerate adoption, because today that's the hurdle, right? Someone gets to sort of the point where they want to bring money in, right, or take money out, and it's takes time or comes at a prohibitive cost for small payments, right? I think we've solved it for bigger payments, but for small payments, that's something that's really only now getting much better, and I think that's key differentiator for Celo and the Celo ecosystem.
Yeah. And this is something I feel really passionately about, so maybe I'll jump in real quick. But if you think about it, right, like we've solved the ability to send payments to anyone, right, in the world, right? Like I think not just with Valora and Celo, but I would say as a broader Web3 ecosystem, right? We have enough scalability, we have enough functionality now, and certainly on Celo we have the ease of use to send stable coins to anyone in the world, to literally any phone number, and have them receive it like within like 2.5 seconds on average, without and be able to then send it on to someone else without having to go and buy gas. So that's great, but we haven't seen this explosion of payments the way that, for example, when WhatsApp kind of launched, kind of took over the world, when they basically made sending a message to any phone number in the world free and instantaneous. And we hypothesize that this is because the value is not immediately useful for everyone in the world, right? Unless you can cash out instantly, or until all payments become Web3 based, which I think I would imagine a lot of your listeners think is going to happen, and hopefully soon. We're in this transition period until that happens, where you need to be able to move back and forth between fiat and crypto really, really easily. And not just in one country, but in every country in the world. And the only way we get there is if we have hundreds and hundreds of on and off ramps that all have their licenses and local banking relations in each market to be able to offer that service. And increasingly, we're seeing, dozens and soon hundreds of these on and off ramps in all kind of markets around the world launching. A lot of people are really excited about this business opportunity. But the one thing that's really holding back the whole ecosystem is the fact that everyone speaks a different language, right? Every on and off ramp has their own API, their own web widget, which is a pain to integrate for wallets and a pain to maintain. It's not feasible for wallets to have hundreds and hundreds of these bespoke integrations. And so, when this happens, a very standard solution is to create a standard. And so that's what Fiat Connect is. You can read more about it at fiatconnect.org. But, if you launch a standard, all it does typically is it becomes like an extra thing that people have to integrate. And so Rene mentioned Connect the World. That's what we launched. The foundation launched a $20 million incentive program to effectively incentivize the adoption of the standard. And that's been going well. There's, I think, 50 different, there's about 50 markets that are currently in flight to launch soon, of which the first 6 launched just a few weeks ago. I think we have Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, Uganda, India, and the Philippines are all live, using a number of different providers, integrated into Valora and soon into other wallets in the Celo ecosystem. And critically, it's a native experience. The user doesn't even know that they're using a third party. Certainly, it's mentioned in the app, but they don't have to go through a custom login screen in a web browser. It just all feels very, very native to the wallet. And yeah, this is, I think, the power of crypto, right? That we can have incentive models that we can organize as a group to solve really big and ambitious problems. And I think solving on and off ramping globally is like extremely ambitious, extremely big. And luckily, crypto is just very amenable to doing that really, really well.
Yeah. How come you guys don't just what's the decision behind not just being a rollup on Ethereum? Like why I feel like that would remove the cost of like needing to bootstrap and maintain this validator network while being able to provide the capital and the users on Ethereum. What's the thought process behind not going down that route?
Yeah, great question. I think part of it is, rollups were invented long after Celo started. And so we've invested, heavily and done that bootstrapping. We have a really great consensus protocol that, has only really had one hiccup over the last 3 years, and otherwise has been, just absolutely rock solid. The other thing I would say is, some of our use cases require very low transaction fees and one block finality and short block times. When people are, for example, dispersing UBIs or using P2P transaction, just using it for P2P transactions in emerging markets, they can't really pay more than 1/10 of a cent for a transaction before it starts becoming not economical to use a public blockchain. And sadly, with rollups today, you can't say on Ethereum, you can't achieve that cost. Right? I think the reality is that until dank sharding comes out on Ethereum, it just you won't be able to store your transactions on Ethereum at scale and be able to deliver those low costs. So we're big believers in rollups. I think we agree that it is by far the most secure way of scaling a chain horizontally. I think the kind of the organic Cosmos-like model, I think, has some appeal, but from a security perspective, I think you're definitely making trade-offs. You ultimately end up having to trust the validator sets of all the chains that are sending you messages. And so as a full node, you have to basically run all the chains, which doesn't really scale. The sharded model that Ethereum 2 started with, I think, has a very similar problem where full nodes have to run all the shards to be able to trust what's going on in any one shard. So from that perspective, rollups, to be able to only have to trust that there exists one honest full node, or in the case of ZK rollups, you don't even have to trust that. I mean, that is extremely appealing, and we're really big believers of that strategy. How it fits into kind of Celo's long-term plan with regards to Ethereum, I think is something that, the community is talking about. But right now, there's not much to be decided on because the gas cost would just be prohibitive for all the use cases happening on Celo.
Yeah. Awesome, guys. Well, I appreciate you guys making the time here. Rene and Marek, anything else that we missed that you guys really want to talk about?
Look, I think we've covered a lot. I would say for anyone who's listening, who's a builder, and you haven't checked out Celo yet, definitely give it a look. Celo.org. We're coming up on 250 million transactions, processed smoothly on the network. I track about 1,000, a little bit over 1,000 projects, active projects. Try to be in touch with with many of them. Over 100 of those have raised venture funding. I think that's a little known fact as well. Q3, Q4 of last year is over 100 million in venture money going into projects built on top of Celo. So not like Celo itself, but into the ecosystem. So it's a very vibrant community. Lots of investors all over the world as well. So there's a bunch of folks also running ecosystem funds, and projects are getting funded right now. I think real world use cases are really top of mind for a lot of people. Regenerative finance as a concept too, if folks are new to that and haven't heard, highly encourage to take a closer look. I think it's really a big shift that we're seeing from like a year ago where no one really talked about it to now it's becoming much more of a sort of something that every dApp developers is thinking about, hey, what does it mean to build, in a regenerative way? And I think it's something that users also really appreciate and gravitate towards. So, I would just invite everyone to, check Celo out, come to one of our events, meetups. We're a very friendly community. So just come and say hi at like the next event.
Yeah, and we have community centers in San Francisco, in New York, in Berlin, in Buenos Aires. And so it's a great way to meet people in person. So if you're in any of those locations, or if you're traveling to any of those locations, then definitely come knock on our door.
Nice. Awesome, guys. Well, appreciate the time, and I will talk to you guys soon.
Thanks so much. It was fun.
Bye. Yeah, thanks for having us.